She'll never notice the missing money. That's what I heard. Soft laughter following careless and cruel. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I was old fragile and blind to betrayal. But they were wrong. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Ruth Henderson, and I suppose I should start by saying I'm not a fool. I may be 74, my hair silvered and my knees slower than they used to be, but my mind still catches everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the air smells of rain and old lilacs. My son Daniel and his wife Vanessa had come over for lunch. The house was warm, the chicken casserole in the oven, and the sound of my late husband's old clock ticking in the corner. I remember setting the table, humming to myself, grateful for company. Vanessa had always been charming, too charming perhaps. She had a way of smiling that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel adored her, though. He said she was modern, efficient, and practical. Those were his words. I preferred calculating. I was pouring iced tea when I heard it. Her voice low but mocking coming from the hallway. She'll never notice the missing money. I froze. My heart stumbled. There was a pause, then laughter. Daniel's softer, uncertain, like he didn't want to agree but didn't want to argue either. I stood still behind the kitchen doorway, my hands trembling, condensation dripping from the glass. I could hear every word like a nail being driven in. It's just a few hundred here and there, she said. She doesn't even know how to use her bank app. Honestly, it's safer with us. They were talking about me, about my money, about the savings my husband and I had built over 40 years of teaching and fixing broken things and skipping vacations. When they walked back into the dining room, I pretended nothing happened. My smile felt like porcelain, brittle and hollow. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. Vanessa beamed, complimenting the casserole she hadn't helped make. Daniel avoided my eyes. We ate like everything was fine, but inside something had shifted. That day a seed of suspicion took root, and it would grow into something stronger than either of them expected. After lunch, Vanessa offered to handle the bills like she often did. "It's just easier, Mom," she said, waving her phone. "Everything's online now." She smiled sweetly, the same smile she probably used on bank clerks and delivery men. I nodded, pretending to be the grateful old lady she believed I was. When they left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty plates and folded napkins. My husband's photo sat by the mantel, that steady look in his eyes. He'd been gone 8 years now, but I could almost hear his voice. "Don't let anyone handle what you built, Ruth," I whispered back to him. I think I already did. That night I took out my old ledger, a habit from my teaching days. I started writing line by line what I remembered. Deposits, withdrawals, bills. My handwriting shook, but my resolve didn't. Something wasn't right. A few missing entries, smaller deposits, small cash transfers I didn't remember making. I stared at the numbers until my vision blurred. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. They thought I was too old to notice, too kind to confront, too slow to fight back. But I wasn't done yet. I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a long while listening to the wind against the window. And in that quiet, I made myself a promise. I would find out exactly what they took, and I would take back everything they thought I'd lost. The next few weeks felt like living inside a polite performance. Vanessa called me Mom in that honey-dipped voice, dropping by with grocery bags and bright smiles. She'd pat my shoulder and say things like, "You just relax. I'll take care of everything." And I let her believe that I believed her. Every Sunday she'd bring her iPad and open my online banking. "Just checking the utilities," she'd chirp. "These companies charge so many hidden fees." I didn't mind at first. The numbers looked fine and my pension arrived like clockwork. But slowly, small oddities crept in. $120 missing here, $80 there. When I asked, she laughed, brushing invisible lint from her blouse. "You must have withdrawn it for groceries, Mom. Don't you remember?" Her tone was so light, so confident that for a moment I doubted myself. I told myself it was age. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was becoming one of those confused old women people whisper about in waiting rooms. That thought terrified me more than the missing money. So I started writing things down again, little notes on a pad by the phone. I logged every bill payment, every grocery trip, every check. Vanessa found the notebook once and smiled. "That's adorable," she said, "like balancing a checkbook in the 90s. I smiled back, though my hands clenched under the table. One afternoon I overheard her in the garden talking on the phone. The window was cracked open for air. The smell of lemon polish drifted through. "Honestly," she was saying, "I should get a medal for dealing with her finances. Old people shouldn't manage money. It's basically a public service what I'm doing. I felt something cold run down my spine. It wasn't what she said. It was the laughter that followed, bright and cruel, echoing against my rose bushes. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up rereading bank letters, cross-checking every line against my notebook. Numbers don't lie. People do. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet, because I remembered my husband's voice again. Don't start a war until you know the battlefield. So I observed. Vanessa began visiting more often, always under the pretext of helping. She'd insist on using her own card for groceries and say I could reimburse her later. She even set up automatic bill payments so you don't have to worry. The truth was, she was slowly moving my entire life into her hands. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. He worked long hours at the firm, came home tired, and trusted his wife completely. Whenever I hinted at my unease, he'd sigh. "Mom, Vanessa's just trying to make things easier for you. Please don't start imagining things." Imagining. That word stung. I nodded and let it drop. But inside, I was already starting to keep secrets of my own. A few days later, I noticed something new. A letter addressed to Vanessa Henderson from my bank accidentally delivered to my mailbox. The envelope was thick, stamped account update. My pulse raced. I didn't open it, but I knew what it meant. She'd linked herself deeper than I realized. I no longer believed in coincidences. When another letter arrived from a finance company I'd never heard of, I called them. The woman on the other end confirmed a $15,000 loan had been approved under my name with my signature. When she emailed me the paperwork, I saw the signature had been forged. The pieces started to fit together like a picture I'd been kept from seeing for too long. I went to my old filing cabinet and pulled out old financial documents. Tax returns, copies of pension statements, everything. I spread them across the dining table and began tracking the money. I planned a trip to the bank without telling Daniel or Vanessa. I wore my best outfit, the navy blue suit I'd worn when I retired, and did my makeup carefully. I wanted them to look at me and see a smart, confident woman, not a confused old lady. The bank manager, Mr. Garland, checked my accounts, and his face darkened. "Mrs. Henderson, there are some irregularities here." He turned the computer screen so I could see. Vanessa's name had not only been added to my savings account, but to my checking and retirement accounts as well. Moreover, money had been regularly transferred into an account I'd never opened. "In total," Mr. Garland said quietly, "about $28,000 has been withdrawn over the past 6 months." I sat silently for a moment, feeling as if all the air had been sucked from the room. 28,000, nearly half my life savings. I thought of all the years standing in front of classrooms, marking tests, living frugally and modestly. About how Richard and I had forgone vacations to save for our old age. "Mrs. Henderson," Mr. Garland was looking at me with concern. "Would you like us to notify the police?" I found myself shaking my head. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Not yet. First, I want you to help me do something. I want to freeze all accounts, immediately. I want Vanessa removed from everything, and I want new accounts that only I can access." Mr. Garland nodded understanding. "You can trust us, Mrs. Henderson. We'll handle this situation with you. This isn't the first time we've seen this happen." When I left the bank late that afternoon, I felt a change within me. The pain and betrayal were still there, but something else had joined them. A quiet determination, a sense of power I'd forgotten I had. That evening, my phone rang. Vanessa, her voice tense and confused. "Ruth, I just tried to buy groceries and my card was declined. And when I called the bank, they said the accounts have been frozen." "Oh, really?" I asked, my voice as calm as a lake on a windless summer morning. "Why would they do that?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then, with a lower voice, "Ruth, what did you do?" I looked out the window into the darkening autumn twilight. "No," I answered quietly. "The right question is, what did you do, Vanessa?" The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice now filled with fear, masked by anger. "Ruth, there's a misunderstanding. I've been helping you manage your finances. Everything was approved." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. "Don't lie to me in my own house." "Oh, let's talk about the $15,000 loan I never signed for," I said. "Or about the $28,000 that's disappeared from my accounts in the past 6 months. Or perhaps about how your name was added to all my accounts without my permission." "Ruth, Mom, I can explain," she stammered. "Daniel and we were just borrowing. There was an investment opportunity." "On the beach?" I asked. "A beachfront vacation home I wasn't invited to." Vanessa's voice broke. "How do you know about—" But I'd overheard her phone call. The laughter. I had been watching and listening while she thought I was blind and deaf. Why, I asked simply. She launched into a lengthy explanation about Daniel having financial difficulties, about an opportunity to invest, about how they would pay it all back. I let her talk like a patient teacher waiting for a student to finish explaining why they didn't do their homework. Vanessa, I finally interrupted. All accounts are now frozen. All your access has been revoked, and I have all the paperwork showing you forged my signature. What happens next is entirely up to you. You and Daniel can meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss repaying my money, or I can take these documents to the police station in the afternoon. I spoke these words not with anger, but with the clarity and purpose of someone who had made their decision and would not be swayed. Why? She whispered. Because, I said softly, it's mine. The next morning, Daniel and Vanessa arrived, no longer pretending at friendliness. Daniel's eyes were red-rimmed and avoided mine. Vanessa was cold defensive. I'd been up since dawn preparing. I wore Richard's favorite dress, navy blue with pearl buttons he always said made me look dignified. I made tea and set out 3 cups on the table. Our cards were declined at the restaurant last night, Vanessa said immediately. The mortgage payment bounced. She didn't say hello or I'm sorry. Sit down, I said. Vanessa didn't. She hovered near the doorway like a cat ready to strike. You've created a mess, Ruth, she hissed. The bank froze everything. You could have called us before doing something so irrational. Irrational, I repeated, tasting the word. Is that what you call protecting myself? Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. Mom, this isn't like you. Vanessa's been helping you for years. Why would you just... I reached for the folder beside me and slid it across the table. Because she forged my signature. Vanessa froze. That's ridiculous, she stammered. You're confused. That's not... Don't, I said quietly, meeting her eyes. Don't lie to me in my own house. I opened the folder 1 page at a time. The bank's fraud report, the copy of the forged signature, the unauthorized transfers highlighted in yellow. I had organized it like a teacher presenting evidence to a student who thought she could cheat and never get caught. Daniel's face drained of color as he scanned the papers. Vanessa, what is this? They're twisting it, she cried. It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that cost me $28,000, I said calmly. A misunderstanding that used my dead husband's name to open fake accounts. A misunderstanding that moved my pension behind my back. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. You don't understand, Ruth, she said, her voice trembling. We were just borrowing. Daniel lost some work hours and we were short on bills. I meant to replace it. By calling me senile behind my back, by laughing about the missing money you said I'd never notice. The words hit like stones. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel stood there, torn between us, his wife in tears, his mother unflinching. You knew, I said to him softly. Didn't you? He looked down, his silence saying everything. I didn't think it was that bad, he murmured. She said it was temporary. The sound that escaped me wasn't a cry. It was something smaller, heavier. The quiet sound of a heart breaking. I gathered the papers back into the folder, stood, and said simply, You both need to leave. Vanessa's head snapped up. You can't just... I interrupted. Because this house, this account, this life, they're mine, not yours. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please. I raised you to be honest, I said, my voice breaking. Not to stand by while someone steals from me. You both crossed a line I can't uncross. They hesitated, then turned to go. At the door, Vanessa spun around. You'll regret this, Ruth, she spat. You'll die alone. I smiled faintly. I'd rather die alone than live surrounded by thieves. When the door slammed shut, the silence that followed felt like freedom. I sat back down the tea, now cold, and stared at the old family portrait on the mantel. Daniel as a child grinning between his father and me. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Not this time, because that was the moment I realized I hadn't lost a family. I'd shed a lie. The morning after they left the house was still. The silence felt different now. Not heavy with tension, but calm, honest. I stood at the window watching the sunlight spill across the yard where Daniel used to play as a boy. I thought of his laughter, of scraped knees and bedtime stories. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't cry, because grief wasn't the only thing I felt that morning. There was something new, something I hadn't tasted in years. Freedom. In the days that followed, the phone rang often. Sometimes Daniel, sometimes Vanessa. I let the calls go unanswered. Eventually, they stopped trying. Mr. Garland handled the rest. The bank finalized its investigation, and Vanessa's name was permanently removed from every document. She was blacklisted from the account for fraud. I didn't press criminal charges, not out of mercy, but because I didn't need to. Their punishment was silence. Their consequence was losing the woman who once trusted them without question. I met with Mr. Garland one last time in his office, the walls lined with law books and the faint smell of old leather. He smiled as I signed the final papers. "You've handled this with more grace than most people could," he said. "Grace comes easier when you've already walked through fire," I replied. He chuckled softly. "What will you do now?" I thought about it for a moment. "Live," I said simply, on my terms this time. When I returned home that evening, I opened every window, let the air move through, freely carrying away the stale scent of worry and betrayal. I baked an apple pie, something I hadn't done since my husband passed, and sat at the table with a single slice, savoring it slowly. It tasted like peace. Over the following weeks, I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I reconnected with my old book club, began volunteering at the library, and even started teaching neighborhood children how to read cursive, a dying art, they say. But to me, it's a reminder that the old ways still have strength. Some neighbors asked where Daniel and Vanessa had gone. "Oh, they moved on," I'd say, smiling faintly. And so did I. I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Bitterness traps you in the same cage the betrayal built. I had no interest in staying there. One evening, while organizing old photographs, I came across a picture of Daniel as a baby. His tiny hand clutched around my finger. My heart softened. "I hope you find your way back, son," I whispered. "But you'll have to do it with clean hands." I didn't hate him. I pitied him for forgetting that integrity is worth more than money, and that once trust is broken, no sum can buy it back. As the months passed, the seasons turned. My garden bloomed again. Roses, marigolds, even the stubborn tulips that never used to take. I tended to them like I tended to myself, patiently, gently, with faith that roots heal even when branches break. 6 months after the confrontation, I joined a support group for elderly victims of financial exploitation. I thought I would find solace, but instead I found purpose. My story wasn't unique. There were other women and men, all betrayed by those they loved most. A man named Howard, 80 years old, shared his story of having his life savings stolen by his daughter and son-in-law. We started talking after the meeting, and I discovered he was a former bank investigator. His knowledge of the financial system was invaluable. We began organizing workshops for other elderly members of the community, teaching them how to protect themselves. "You know," Howard said to me one day, "we could turn this into something bigger." With help from Mr. Garland and Howard, I started a small educational campaign. We worked with local banks on implementing better protections for elderly customers. I shared my story at community centers and retirement clubs. With each person I helped, my own wounds seemed to heal a little more. Howard and I grew close. He was tall, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that always seemed to look beyond what was in front of them. We started having weekly dinners together, sharing stories about life before betraying children and lost spouses. He understood the inexpressible pain of being betrayed by your own flesh and blood. "People think age makes us weak," he said one evening as we sat on my porch with cups of tea. "But they don't understand that pain teaches you strength young people never know." One morning I received a legal letter. Vanessa and Daniel were attempting to petition for partial guardianship over me, claiming I was incapable of managing my finances and at risk of being taken advantage of. The irony would have been humorous if it weren't so painful. I called Mr. Garland immediately, who referred me to a lawyer friend of his, Emily Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, a sharp woman in her 50s with black hair streaked with silver, read the documents and shook her head in disbelief. "They think they can take legal control after they couldn't steal from you," she said, indignation evident. "We won't let that happen." The day of the hearing arrived. I wore my most elegant outfit with a pearl pin Richard had given me on our 25th wedding anniversary. Howard came with me for moral support, as did 5 people from my support group. Vanessa and Daniel sat on the opposite side of the room, not daring to meet my eyes. Their lawyer presented a story of a confused elderly woman imagining betrayal, no longer capable of managing her finances. They even had a psychological expert who had never met me ready to testify about paranoia patterns in the elderly. When it was Ms. Rodriguez's turn, she stood with a thick folder in her hands. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I want to make one thing clear. My client, Mrs. Ruth Henderson, is not only entirely competent, but one of the smartest individuals I've ever met." Ms. Rodriguez presented clear evidence of my mental capacity, doctor's reports, cognitive tests, even articles I'd recently written for the community newsletter about financial safety for seniors. She continued by calling Howard and Mr. Garland as witnesses, both testifying to my mental sharpness. When she presented the bank's detailed fraud report on what Vanessa and Daniel had done, their lawyer's face went pale. Clearly, they hadn't been informed of the existence of this document. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, listened patiently. When all evidence had been presented, she looked directly at Daniel and Vanessa. "I have sat on this bench for 22 years, she said, "and rarely have I seen such a brazen attempt to take an elderly person's assets after fraudulent efforts failed." She dismissed their petition, affirmed my full capacity, and ordered Vanessa to repay the $28,000 within 90 days or face criminal charges. As I left the courthouse, Daniel chased after me in the parking lot. Vanessa wasn't with him. "Mom," he called, his voice breaking. "Mom, I'm sorry." I stopped, turned. His face was puffy from crying, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, tired. "I know it doesn't matter now," he said, "but I wanted you to know I'm in Gamblers Anonymous. I had a problem. A bad problem. Not an excuse, just the truth." I stood silent, assessing my son not as a mother who loved her child unconditionally, but as a woman looking at a man who had deliberately hurt her. "I'm working 2 jobs now," he continued when I said nothing. "I'll pay back your money every cent. It will take time, but I'll do it, whether you forgive me or not." "And Vanessa?" I finally asked. Daniel looked down. "We're divorcing. She blames me for all of it. Maybe she's right." "No," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Each person is responsible for their own actions, including you." Daniel nodded, swallowing tears. "Do you think we could someday?" I looked into his eyes so remarkably like his father's, and saw genuine pain and regret. But I also saw a man who had betrayed the deepest trust. "I don't know, Daniel," I answered honestly. "Trust once broken is like a glass plate. You can glue it back together, but the cracks are always there." He nodded, tears running down his cheeks. "I understand, but I'll try, if you give me a chance." "Time will tell," I said. "Start by keeping your promises." As Howard and I drove home, he took my hand in the passenger seat. "You were brave, Ruth. Not everyone could face their betraying child with such composure." "Not courage," I smiled weakly. "Just experience. When you've lost almost everything, you realize what's left is most precious, your dignity." Howard gently squeezed my hand. "And sometimes," he said softly, "you find new family in the places you least expect." 1 year had passed since the day I overheard Vanessa saying those words in the hallway. The woman I was now would hardly recognize the woman I had been. I was no longer the abandoned, humble grandmother living in shadows. I taught 2 classes each week at the community center, one on financial safety for seniors and one on memoir writing. I spoke at conferences about elder protection. Howard and I traveled to places Richard and I had always wanted to see, but never found the time or money for the Grand Canyon, the Caribbean Sea, even Paris for a special vacation. Daniel kept his promise. Each month a check arrived, along with a letter updates on his gambling recovery progress, his new job, the smaller house he'd moved to. He never asked for forgiveness or requested a meeting. He just wrote patient and consistent. After 6 months of these letters, I invited him for coffee. We met at a neutral cafe. The conversation was awkward but sincere. He told me about his new job as an accountant at a nonprofit and about the support group that had helped him overcome gambling. I told him about my classes and about Howard. I now managed my finances completely independently. I took online courses on investing, opened new retirement accounts, and even started a small scholarship fund at the high school where I once taught. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure, and more importantly, I knew exactly where every dollar of mine was. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the trees, I sat on the porch with Howard, enjoying the comfortable silence we often shared. Daniel would stop by later for dinner, part of our new routine, a monthly meal where we carefully rebuilt what had been broken. I had received a letter from the bank in the morning addressed to Mrs. Ruth Henderson. Just my name, no joint account, no secondary access, just me. I smiled, tracing my fingers over the ink. It was the simplest proof that I had taken back what was mine. I looked at the horizon and smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile Vanessa used to wear, but a real one, soft, proud, earned. "They thought age made me weak," I murmured, "but wisdom, that's something they'll never understand." And that, I said aloud to the quiet evening, was the day I took back my life and my power. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments, because I know some of you out there have faced that same quiet kind of betrayal, the one that comes dressed as kindness. A week passed after I slammed my door on Daniel and Vanessa. 7 quiet days of rebuilding my routines without their shadows hanging over me. The morning light fell differently through the windows, now casting patterns that seemed more honest somehow. The first coffee of the day tasted stronger, more real. Even the birds outside seemed to sing with greater clarity, as if the air itself had been cleared of some invisible pollution. The phone calls had stopped by now. The last voicemail from Vanessa held no apologies, only threats about legal action and accusations of mental instability. Daniel's messages were different, halting words punctuated by long pauses as if he couldn't decide between apology and justification. I deleted them all. Some wounds need clean air to heal, and this one needed silence. I found myself sleeping better than I had in months. No more lying awake wondering about strange numbers in bank statements or the quiet exchange of glances between my son and his wife when they thought I wasn't looking. The relief was like setting down a heavy bag I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Yet beneath that relief ran an undercurrent of sorrow. Not for the money, though $28,000 represented years of careful saving, but for the family I thought I had. The family that existed only in my imagination. The doorbell rang on a Thursday morning while I was repotting an African violet that had outgrown its container. Soils scattered across the newspaper I'd laid down as I rose to answer it. Not Daniel or Vanessa, they wouldn't ring the bell. Perhaps a delivery I'd forgotten about. Instead, I found Mr. Garland on my doorstep holding a manila envelope and wearing the formal expression of someone performing an unpleasant duty. "Mrs. Henderson, I thought you should see this right away." His voice was gentle, but carried a note of warning that made my stomach clench. The envelope contained an application for guardianship filed in Tampa's family court. The petitioners, Daniel and Vanessa Henderson. The grounds, mental incompetence, paranoia, and inability to manage financial affairs. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between the typed lines old age had stolen my mind, and they needed to protect me from myself. The irony might have made me laugh if rage hadn't surged through me first. They're trying to declare me incompetent after I caught them stealing from me. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, tight with a fury I rarely allowed myself to feel. They want a court to hand them control of everything they failed to take. Mr. Garland nodded grimly. Unfortunately, this is a common tactic. Family members who've been cut off financially sometimes try to regain control through legal channels. They'll need to prove you're incompetent, which you clearly aren't, but the process itself can be draining. You'll need representation. The business card he handed me bore the name Emily Rodriguez, elder law attorney. She specializes in cases like yours, fighting back against financial exploitation and unwarranted guardianship petitions. She'll help you navigate this. That afternoon in Ms. Rodriguez's downtown office, I found myself surrounded by degrees and certifications displayed on dark walnut walls. The woman behind the desk carried herself with the focused intensity of someone who had seen too many elders, stripped of their autonomy, and had developed a righteous anger in response. She reviewed my documents with methodical precision, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she examined the guardianship petition. "This is particularly brazen," she muttered. "They're claiming you exhibited paranoid behavior by accusing them of theft when there's documented proof of the theft itself. Can they win?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Ms. Rodriguez removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct gaze. "Not if we fight properly, but make no mistake, Mrs. Henderson, this will get ugly before it gets better. They'll try to paint you as confused, forgetful, possibly even delusional. They'll bring up every minor memory lapse, every senior moment you've ever had. They'll twist your words and actions to fit their narrative. I won't let them take my dignity along with my money." The words emerged with a conviction that surprised even me. She smiled then, a flash of approval crossing her face. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Now here's what we're going to do." The strategy Ms. Rodriguez outlined was comprehensive. We would gather medical evaluations confirming my mental competence. We'd document my ongoing community involvement. We'd collect statements from people who interacted with me regularly. Most importantly, we would assemble irrefutable evidence of Vanessa and Daniel's financial exploitation to demonstrate the true motivation behind their guardianship petition. Leaving her office, I felt simultaneously strengthened and exhausted. The battle ahead loomed large, but for the first time since discovering the theft, I had armor and weapons of my own. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my personhood, my right to exist as a fully autonomous human being despite my age. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A silver-haired man in a neatly pressed button-down shirt stood on my porch holding a folder of papers. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Howard Brennan. Emily Rodriguez suggested I might be helpful to you." Howard, I soon learned, was both a former bank fraud investigator and a fellow survivor of elder financial exploitation. His daughter and son-in-law had systematically drained his retirement accounts while managing his finances after his wife's death. Unlike me, he hadn't discovered the theft until they'd taken nearly everything. "The worst part wasn't losing the money," he explained as we sat at my kitchen table. "It was realizing that someone you love sees you as nothing more than a resource to be drained. An ATM with a pulse." His words crystallized exactly what had been haunting me, that sickening realization that in Daniel and Vanessa's eyes, I had ceased to be a person with feelings and dignity. I had become a problem to be managed, an obstacle between them and what they wanted. The dehumanization cut deeper than the financial loss ever could. "They're trying to take guardianship now," I told him. "They want the court to declare me incompetent." Howard nodded grimly. "Classic move. When the backdoor approach fails, they try the front door with legal papers. My daughter tried the same thing. Claimed I was experiencing cognitive decline when I confronted her about the missing funds. How did you fight it?" "Documentation, witnesses, and making myself so visibly competent that their claims looked ridiculous." He pulled several papers from his folder. "I've put together some resources for you. Organizations that help elders fighting exploitation, documentation strategies, and a list of steps you should take immediately to protect yourself." For the next 2 hours, Howard walked me through a comprehensive self-protection plan. We documented all my financial accounts and set up additional security measures. We created a system for tracking my daily activities to demonstrate my independence. Most importantly, he helped me understand what to expect in the coming legal battle. "They'll use every tool against you," he warned. "Age is still the easiest target in America. People hear elderly woman and immediately picture confusion and frailty. You'll need to counter that image at every turn." As Howard prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Henderson, Ruth, would you consider joining our support group? We meet weekly at the community center. All of us have experienced financial exploitation by family members. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." The first meeting I attended revealed a truth both comforting and disturbing. My story was remarkably common. Around the circle sat men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, each with a tale of betrayal by those they'd trusted most. A retired schoolteacher whose nephew had drained her accounts. A former firefighter whose son had remortgaged his house without his knowledge. A widowed nurse whose granddaughter had opened credit cards in her name. What struck me most was their resilience. These weren't broken people, despite having experienced profound betrayal. They were fighters determined to reclaim their lives and their dignity. Their shared wisdom became an invaluable resource as I prepared for the guardianship hearing. The morning of my first court date arrived with an unseasonable chill. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored navy suit that conveyed confidence and competence, subtle makeup hair neatly styled. No detail was too small in the battle against age-related stereotypes. Even my choice of shoes, sensible but stylish low heels, was calculated to project independence without appearing vain. The courthouse loomed like a modernist fortress, all concrete and glass. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and muted conversations. I spotted Daniel and Vanessa immediately huddled with their attorney near the courtroom doors. Daniel looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. Vanessa maintained her perfect appearance, not a hair out of place, though her smile seemed brittle when she spoke to their lawyer. They saw me approaching with Ms. Rodriguez and Howard flanking me. Daniel's face flushed with an emotion I couldn't name, shame perhaps, or anger, or some complex mixture of both. Vanessa's expression hardened into something close to hatred, her eyes narrowing as they tracked my movement. Neither spoke. The silence between us stretched taut as a wire. Inside the courtroom, their attorney presented their case first. "Your Honor, we bring this petition out of deep concern for Mrs. Henderson's well-being. In recent months, she has exhibited increasingly paranoid behavior, making unfounded accusations against family members who have only tried to help her. She has frozen accounts, disrupted financial arrangements that were set up for her benefit, and isolated herself from family support systems." Each word landed like a small betrayal. The creative reframing of events portraying their theft as help my self-protection as paranoia was masterful in its manipulation. They had brought a doctor who had never met me, but was prepared to testify about typical patterns of cognitive decline based on the behaviors they described. Ms. Rodriguez responded with methodical precision. Your Honor, what the petitioners have conveniently omitted is the documented evidence of financial exploitation that precipitated Mrs. Henderson's actions. She presented the bank's fraud investigation report, the loan documents with the forged signature, and the records of unauthorized transfers. This isn't a case of cognitive decline. This is a case of a competent older adult protecting herself from theft and then facing retaliation when she succeeded. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes, studied the documents carefully. These are serious allegations, Ms. Rodriguez. Do the petitioners wish to address the evidence of financial impropriety? Their attorney shuffled papers nervously. Your Honor, there were informal financial arrangements between family members. Mrs. Henderson had agreed to assist her son and daughter-in-law during a difficult period. Any irregularities in documentation were simple misunderstandings, not fraud. Misunderstandings. The word escaped me before I could contain it, drawing the judge's attention directly to me. Mrs. Henderson, would you like to address the court regarding these misunderstandings? Standing to face the judge, I felt a lifetime of experiences straightening my spine. 40 years of maintaining classroom discipline. 8 years of managing a loan after Richard's death. Decades of being underestimated because of my age and gender. All of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Your Honor, there was no misunderstanding when they forged my signature on loan documents. There was no misunderstanding when they transferred my pension money without my knowledge. And there was certainly no misunderstanding when I overheard my daughter-in-law laughing about how I would never notice the missing money. My voice remained steady dignity intact. I have managed my finances successfully for 74 years. I balanced school budgets as department head for 15 of those years. I am not confused or incompetent. I am angry, and with good reason. The judge nodded slowly. I see. She turned to the petitioner's table. In light of the evidence presented, I'm denying the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full accounting of all funds removed from Mrs. Henderson's accounts to be completed within 30 days. Her gaze hardened as it swept over Daniel and Vanessa. Be advised that elder financial exploitation is a criminal offense in the state of Florida. Mrs. Henderson has shown considerable restraint in not pursuing criminal charges thus far. The gavel's sharp crack echoed my racing heartbeat. Victory, yes, but hollow somehow. I had won the right to remain myself, to maintain control over my own life, something that should never have been contested in the first place. In the hallway afterward, Daniel approached alone, Vanessa having stormed out immediately after the ruling. His shoulders slumped beneath his suit jacket, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. Mom, I need to tell you something about why this happened. I think I know why it happened, Daniel. You wanted my money. He flinched as if I'd struck him. It wasn't that simple. I have a gambling problem. Have had one for years. Online poker sports betting. It spiraled out of control. I kept thinking one big win would fix everything, but instead I just dug us deeper. His voice cracked with emotion. Vanessa found out when they threatened to foreclose on the house. She came up with the plan to borrow from you until I could win it back. The revelation settled over me like a heavy blanket. A gambling addiction explained so much: the financial desperation, the secrecy, the willingness to betray family. Not an excuse, but a context that filled in missing pieces of the puzzle. Why didn't you just ask for help? His laugh held no humor. How could I, Dad's successful son with the perfect life, admitting I'd gambled away our savings? I couldn't face you knowing what I'd become. So stealing was better than honesty. The question hung between us unanswerable. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I've started going to Gamblers Anonymous. Too late to save my marriage. Vanessa's filing for divorce. Too late for a lot of things. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to fix myself for whatever that's worth. Walking away from him required every ounce of resolve I possessed. Part of me, the mother who had bandaged his scraped knees and celebrated his small victories, wanted to embrace him, to assure him that we would work through this together. But the woman who had been betrayed, whose trust had been violated, knew better. Recovery from addiction was his journey to make. Reconciliation, if it ever came, would need to be earned through actions, not promises. The next weeks brought unexpected changes. True to his word, Daniel began sending small payments toward what he'd taken, a few $100s each month, accompanied by brief notes about his recovery progress. Vanessa disappeared from my life entirely, which felt like a blessing. I learned through community whispers that she had moved to Orlando and was dating a real estate developer. Howard became a fixture in my life, accompanying me to support group meetings and gradually becoming a trusted friend. His calm presence and wry humor made even difficult days bearable. We discovered shared interests in gardening and classical music, often spending evenings on my porch discussing literature or politics while watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. "You know," he remarked one evening, "there's something almost poetic about how we've responded to what happened to us." Poetic being robbed by our own children. Not that part, the after part. He gestured toward the community center visible down the street. Taking our worst experiences and transforming them into something that helps others. Finding purpose in pain. He was referring to the workshops we'd begun offering for seniors on financial security and fraud prevention. What had started as informal presentations to our support group had expanded to regular sessions at the community center, the local library, and even a few retirement communities. We covered everything from common scams to setting up secure banking practices to recognizing the warning signs of exploitation by family members. The workshops gave me a sense of mission I hadn't felt since retiring from teaching. Standing before a room of attentive faces sharing knowledge that might protect others from experiencing what I had, it awakened something I thought had been lost. The educator in me responded to their questions with patience and clarity, while my personal experience lent authority to my warnings. After one particularly well-attended session at Palmetto Seniors Village, the activities director approached with an unexpected proposition. "Mrs. Henderson, we've received a grant to expand our senior education program. Would you consider developing a comprehensive financial literacy curriculum for older adults? It would be a paid position part-time, but substantial." The offer stunned me. At 74, I had assumed my professional life was firmly behind me. Yet here was an opportunity not just to help others, but to rebuild my own financial security that had been so damaged by Daniel and Vanessa's betrayal. "I'd need a partner in this project," I told her, glancing toward Howard, who was packing up our presentation materials. "Someone with banking and fraud investigation expertise to complement my educational background." Within 2 months, Howard and I had developed a 6-week course titled Financial Empowerment for Seniors, and were teaching it at 3 different locations across Tampa. The curriculum covered practical skills like securing digital banking information and recognizing exploitation attempts, but also deeper topics like the emotional dynamics of financial relationships with adult children and the psychological impact of financial betrayal. Our growing visibility in the senior community brought unexpected attention. A producer from the local PBS affiliate contacted us about appearing on a panel discussion about elder financial abuse. The city's Office on Aging invited us to consult on new protection initiatives. A national magazine interviewed us for a feature on elder exploitation. With each public appearance, I felt myself stepping further away from the identity of victim and more firmly into the role of advocate. The woman who had once believed herself too old to fight back was now helping others find their own strength. The transformation wasn't lost on Howard, who commented after one particularly successful workshop, "You've become a force to be reckoned with, Ruth Henderson, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of betrayal." The metaphor made me laugh, but held truth. I had been reborn through fire, emerging stronger and more purposeful than before. Even my relationship with money had fundamentally changed. No longer was it simply a resource to be conserved and eventually passed to my son. Now it represented independent security and the freedom to shape my remaining years on my own terms. 6 months after the court hearing, a certified letter arrived from Daniel's attorney. I recognized the firm's name on the envelope and felt a momentary dread. More legal battles, another attempt to control me through the courts. But the contents surprised me. Daniel had sold the house he'd shared with Vanessa and was sending me a substantial portion of the proceeds, $22,000, toward the money that had been taken. The accompanying note was brief but direct. "Mom, this doesn't undo what happened, but it's a start. I'm continuing with GA and therapy. The new place is small but enough for me. If you ever want to talk, my number is the same. Love, Daniel." I sat with the check for several days, unsure how to respond. The money would certainly help restore my financial security, but accepting it felt complicated. Was it blood money? Conscience money? Or a genuine attempt at making amends? I finally deposited it after discussing the situation with both Howard and my support group, acknowledging that recovery from addiction often includes making restitution, and refusing it might actually impede Daniel's healing process. I sent a brief acknowledgement, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of his effort. "Daniel, I've received and deposited the check. This is a significant step toward repairing the financial damage. I hope your recovery continues successfully. Mom." The emotional damage would take longer to address. Trust once shattered doesn't easily reassemble. But as Howard often reminded me, healing isn't linear. It comes in fits and starts, in small moments of progress, followed by unexpected setbacks. The important thing was that I was moving forward on my own terms. That sense of autonomy extended to other areas of my life as well. I redecorated my living room, replacing the muted tones Richard had preferred with vibrant blues and greens that energized the space. I joined a water aerobics class at the YMCA, strengthening my body along with my resolve. I even took a weekend trip to Sarasota with Howard to attend a jazz festival, something I would never have attempted alone before. Our relationship evolved gradually, neither of us rushing or pressuring the other. We had both experienced profound betrayals and understood the value of building trust slowly. Our Tuesday and Thursday dinner dates became a comfortable routine, as did our Saturday morning walks along Tampa Bay. We were companions in the truest sense, sharing experiences, offering support, enjoying each other's company without demands or expectations. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Howard asked one evening as we sat on my porch watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. "How strange it is that the worst experience of my life ultimately led me to one of the best meeting you." The sentiment mirrored my own thoughts so perfectly that I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining with comfortable familiarity. It's like what we tell people in the workshops. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you truly need. 8 months after the confrontation with Daniel and Vanessa, my financial situation had stabilized. Between Daniel's restitution payment, my part-time work, developing financial literacy programs, and careful management of my remaining savings, I had rebuilt a modest security net. Not enough for luxury, but sufficient for comfort and independence. The knowledge that I had recovered through my own efforts carried its own satisfaction. My 75th birthday arrived on a perfect spring day. Howard had organized a small celebration at my favorite restaurant overlooking the bay, inviting members of our support group and a few neighbors who had become friends. The gathering was exactly what I would have chosen, intimate, relaxed, filled with genuine connections rather than obligatory attendance. As I looked around this table at these people who had entered my life during its most challenging chapter, I felt an unexpected sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal that had brought us together, but for the community that had formed in its aftermath. These were relationships built on mutual respect and understanding, unshadowed by obligation or pretense. The birthday cake arrived with a spray of candles that made everyone laugh. "Make a wish, Ruth," someone called as I prepared to blow them out. In that moment, surrounded by new friends with Howard's steady presence beside me, I realized I didn't need to wish for anything. The life I was creating day by day, independent, purposeful, authentic, was already fulfilling in ways I hadn't imagined possible a year ago. The painful dismantling of my former life had cleared space for something new to grow, something perhaps more suited to who I truly was, rather than who others expected me to be. I closed my eyes briefly, not to wish, but to acknowledge this unexpected turning point. Then I blew out the candles to applause and laughter, stepping fully into the next chapter of my life. A chapter written in my own hand on my own terms, with my own voice, finally unequivocally heard. The autumn following my 75th birthday brought a sense of accomplishment that surprised me. Our financial literacy workshops had expanded to 12 senior centers across 3 counties. The curriculum Howard and I developed had been adopted by Florida's Elder Affairs Department as a model program. What had begun as self-defense against my own exploitation had blossomed into something larger than myself, a mission that gave purpose to days that might otherwise have drifted into the shapeless routine of retirement. "We should write a book," Howard suggested one evening as we reviewed evaluations from our latest workshop. The October breeze carried the scent of jasmine through my open windows, a reminder that even in Florida, seasons changed in their subtle ways. Something practical but personal, combining your teaching skills with our experiences, a guide for seniors and their families on preventing financial exploitation. The prospect both excited and intimidated me. I'd written curriculum materials throughout my teaching career, but never anything for public consumption. Yet the feedback from our workshops consistently mentioned how my personal story had made the dangers real for participants in a way that statistics and warnings never could. Stories reach people where facts can't, I mused, warming to the idea. We could include others from the support group, too. Different perspectives on how exploitation happens and how to recover from it. The project gave our regular meetings a new focus. Howard would arrive with coffee and his laptop, and we'd spend hours drafting chapters, debating approaches, and weaving together practical advice with emotional truths about family betrayal. The work drew us closer in unexpected ways. There's intimacy in shared purpose, a connection that forms when minds align toward a common goal. Our manuscript took shape as winter settled into Tampa's version of the season, milder temperatures and drier air rather than true cold. We titled it Beyond Betrayal, Rebuilding Financial Security and Dignity After Exploitation. Ms. Rodriguez connected us with a literary agent who specialized in self-help titles, and by February we had secured a modest deal with a respected publisher of financial advice books. Throughout this productive period, Daniel continued his monthly payments. Each check arrived with a brief update on his recovery journey. He had completed a 6-month intensive program for gambling addiction. He had found steady work as an accountant at a nonprofit organization. He was attending therapy weekly. The notes never asked for forgiveness or reconciliation. They simply reported his progress, leaving any next steps entirely in my hands. Howard watched my complex reactions to these communications with gentle understanding. "You don't have to decide everything now," he reminded me one afternoon when I found myself staring at Daniel's latest note. "Healing relationships takes time, sometimes a very long time. What if I never want to fully reconcile?" The question emerged from a place of guilt and uncertainty. Motherhood had defined so much of my identity for so long. Wasn't I supposed to forgive my child unconditionally? Then that's your decision to make. Howard's voice held no judgment. Forgiveness doesn't always mean restoration. Sometimes it just means releasing yourself from the burden of anger without returning to the same relationship. Whatever you choose needs to protect your well-being first. His wisdom resonated with something I'd been slowly learning, that my needs mattered. That setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary. That my life and happiness had intrinsic value beyond what I could give to others. These were revolutionary concepts for a woman of my generation, raised to believe that self-sacrifice was the highest feminine virtue. The support group continued to anchor my weeks. Our Tuesday evening meetings had evolved from tear-filled confessions of betrayal to strategic discussions of recovery and advocacy. Newer members still arrived in that raw state of disbelief and hurt, but now they found not just empathy, but practical guidance from those of us further along the healing path. Marge, a 68-year-old whose son had emptied her accounts to support his drug habit, became our newest success story. With the group's support, she had not only secured legal remedies, but had reconnected with a passion for painting that had lain dormant for decades. Her watercolors' luminous landscapes, filled with light and movement, now hung in a local gallery. The transformation in her from broken victim to confident artist embodied everything our group represented. "I never would have picked up a brush again without all of you," she told us during a celebration of her first sold painting. "You reminded me that I'm more than what was taken from me, that there's still time to become something new." Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. The worst kind of theft isn't material at all. It's the stealing of possibility of future joy of becoming. The most insidious damage from my experience with Daniel and Vanessa hadn't been the missing money, but the way their betrayal had temporarily convinced me that my remaining years would be defined by loss and diminishment rather than growth and discovery. Spring arrived with unexpected news. The publisher wanted to expand our book's release with a small promotional tour 5 cities across Florida, where elder financial exploitation rates were highest. The prospect of speaking publicly about my experience triggered a momentary panic. It was one thing to share my story in the supportive environment of our workshops. It was another entirely to expose my family's painful history to strangers and media. "We don't have to do it," Howard assured me when he sensed my hesitation. "The book stands on its own. The tour is just marketing." I spent a restless night weighing the decision. By morning, clarity had emerged through the fog of doubt. If my story could prevent even one person from experiencing what I didn't, I have an obligation to share it. Wasn't this precisely the purpose I had found in the aftermath of betrayal? "I'll do the tour," I told Howard over our regular breakfast meeting. "But I want to frame it carefully. This isn't about villainizing my son or seeking sympathy. It's about education and empowerment." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his eyes crinkling with pride. "That's exactly why you're the right person to do this. You've never lost sight of the larger purpose, even when it would have been easy to surrender to bitterness." The first stop on our modest tour was Jacksonville, where we presented to a packed community center auditorium. My initial nervousness dissolved once I began speaking. The teaching skills honed over 4 decades returned, automatically modulating my voice for emphasis, scanning the audience for engagement, adjusting my pace to maintain interest. When I described discovering the financial exploitation, a tangible tension filled the room. When I outlined the steps I'd taken to regain control, I could see people taking notes, nodding with recognition or determination. The question and answer sessions revealed how desperately this information was needed. Men and women shared their own experiences of exploitation, often in halting emotional terms that suggested they were speaking of it aloud for the first time. Adult children accompanied their elderly parents, seeking ways to protect them without controlling them. Social workers and law enforcement officers asked about warning signs and intervention strategies. In Tampa, our third stop, a local television station requested an interview. The prospect of broadcast media added another level of exposure that gave me pause, but the producer's approach was thoughtful. "We want to focus on prevention and education," she explained. "Your personal experience gives the issue a face and heart, but the emphasis will be on helping others avoid similar situations." The morning of the interview, I chose my outfit with strategic care, a coral blazer that conveyed both authority and approachability, minimal jewelry that wouldn't distract from my words, comfortable but professional shoes that wouldn't mark me as elderly in viewers' minds. These calculated choices represented another lesson learned in my journey. Appearance matters when fighting ageist stereotypes. Fair or not, people judge competence partially on presentation. The interview unfolded smoothly until an unexpected question jolted me from my practiced responses. "Mrs. Henderson, have you forgiven your son?" The anchor's voice softened her expression, communicating that she understood the weight of what she was asking. Time seemed to suspend as I considered my answer. The camera's unblinking eye waited. Howard, watching from offset, gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I took a breath and chose honesty over the easier platitude. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, but a process. I'm still in that process. What I can tell you is that I've released the anger that was hurting me more than anyone else. I've reclaimed my power and rebuilt my life. That feels more important than traditional forgiveness right now. The anchor nodded slowly, respect evident in her expression. That's an important distinction many people might not consider. Traditional narratives about forgiveness often pressure victims to provide emotional closure to those who've harmed them. I continued, finding myself speaking truths I hadn't fully articulated before. But real healing sometimes requires holding people accountable while releasing yourself from the burden of resentment. It's possible to wish someone well on their recovery journey without allowing them back into a position where they could cause further harm. The segment aired that evening. By morning, the station had received so many viewer responses that they invited us back for an expanded discussion on elder rights and family dynamics. Apparently, my nuanced take on forgiveness had resonated with audiences tired of simplified redemption narratives. Our book's release coincided with the final stop on our tour, Orlando, ironically the city where Vanessa had relocated after her divorce from Daniel. The possibility of an accidental encounter briefly crossed my mind, but the sprawling metropolis made such coincidence unlikely. Still, there was a strange symmetry in completing our journey in the place where she had attempted to start anew, perhaps with another elderly target in her sights. The Orlando event drew our largest audience yet. Among the attendees, I noticed a young woman furiously taking notes, occasionally looking up at me with an intensity that suggested more than casual interest. She approached during the book signing afterward, hanging back until most of the line had dissipated. "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Alicia Thompson. I'm a prosecutor with the Elder Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office." She handed me her card-official state seal, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Your presentation today was exactly what we've been trying to communicate to seniors in our jurisdiction. Would you consider consulting with our office on public education initiatives?" The request caught me off guard. From victim to advocate was one transformation. From advocate to professional consultant would be another entirely. At 75, most people weren't launching new career phases. Yet the opportunity aligned perfectly with everything Howard and I had been working toward. "We'd be very interested in discussing possibilities," I told her, including Howard with a glance. "Our schedule has some flexibility now that the book tour is concluding." The meeting with the state attorney's elder crimes team the following week opened doors neither Howard nor I had anticipated. They were developing a comprehensive prevention program targeting financial exploitation and needed advisors with both professional expertise and personal experience. The 6-month consulting contract they offered would provide not just meaningful work, but a significant boost to my still recovering finances. "They're not just hiring us for our story," Howard noted as we reviewed the contract details over dinner that evening. They value our educational approach, our curriculum development. They see us as professionals, not just sympathetic victims. That distinction mattered. While our personal experiences gave us credibility and passion, it was our systematic approach to translating that experience into actionable knowledge that made our work valuable. We weren't defined by what had happened to us, but by what we had created from it. The consulting work brought unexpected connections. At a statewide conference on elder protection, I found myself seated next to a distinguished geriatric psychiatrist whose research focused on the psychological impact of financial exploitation on older adults. The financial damage is often secondary to the relational trauma, Dr. Eleanor Garrett explained as we compared notes between sessions. Many victims experience symptoms similar to PTSD, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting, withdrawal from social connections. Yet few mental health providers recognize or address these specific impacts. Her observations resonated deeply with my own experience. The sleepless nights, the second-guessing of my own perceptions, the reluctance to form new relationships after the betrayal, all were psychological consequences that had received far less attention than the financial aspects of my recovery. Would you consider collaborating on developing materials specifically addressing the emotional recovery process? I found myself asking. Our current curriculum touches on psychological impacts, but it could be significantly strengthened with clinical expertise. This collaboration expanded our work in new directions. Dr. Garrett brought scientific rigor and therapeutic insights that complemented our experiential knowledge. Together, we created a trauma-informed approach to recovery from financial exploitation that addressed both practical and psychological needs. The resulting materials were eventually incorporated into training programs for social workers, law enforcement, and mental health providers across the state. Throughout this professionally fulfilling period, my personal life settled into comfortable patterns. Howard and I maintained our independence while growing increasingly intertwined in daily routines and future plans. We never discussed marriage or formal commitment at our age. Such designations seemed unnecessary complications. Instead, we focused on building a relationship that provided companionship, respect, and support without the baggage of traditional expectations. Our Sunday brunches became a cherished ritual. Sometimes we ventured to waterfront restaurants where the Florida sunshine sparkled off Tampa Bay. Other times, we prepared elaborate meals together in my kitchen, experimenting with recipes neither of us had been bold enough to try when cooking for one. These shared experiences, along with our professional collaborations and quiet evenings of comfortable silence, created a bond unlike any I'd previously known. Not the desperate attachment of youth or the practical partnership of my marriage to Richard, but something uniquely suited to this stage of life. Mindful, intentional, appreciative of each day without taking future days for granted. The one shadow across this contentment was my unresolved relationship with Daniel. His monthly checks continued arriving with their brief updates. He had reached 2 years of recovery. He had been promoted at work. He had started volunteering with a youth mentoring program, trying to help young people avoid the mistakes he'd made. Each note ended the same way. Whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here. No pressure. Howard never pushed me toward reconciliation, but occasionally offered gentle perspective. People do change, he remarked once after I'd read Daniel's latest update. Not always and never completely, but significant change is possible with sufficient motivation and proper support. How do you know when it's real change versus manipulation? The question had haunted me for months. Time, Howard replied simply. Consistent behavior over extended periods. Words aligned with actions. Respect for boundaries. And even then, trust can be rebuilt without returning to vulnerable positions. Summer arrived with sweltering heat that drove even hardy Floridians indoors. On a particularly oppressive July afternoon, Howard and I were reviewing edits for the second edition of our book when my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize with an Orlando area code. Probably a robocall, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Henderson, this is Alicia Thompson from the state attorney's office. The prosecutor's voice carried an urgency that immediately raised my concern. I apologize for the unexpected call, but something has come to our attention that you should know about. My stomach tightened as she continued. We've been building a case against an individual named Vanessa Carson, formerly Vanessa Henderson, for a pattern of elder financial exploitation. In the course of our investigation, we discovered documentation suggesting she's planning to contest your book's depiction of her, possibly with a defamation suit. The news hit like a physical blow. The Though we had changed names in the book and focused primarily on recovery strategies rather than detailed accusations, Vanessa's identity would be easily discernible to anyone who knew our connection. A lawsuit, even a baseless one, would mean legal expenses, public scrutiny, and reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. "We don't believe she has any legitimate claim," Alicia continued, her prosecutor's confidence reassuring. "Based on the evidence we've gathered for our criminal case, your account appears factually accurate. But I wanted you to be prepared in case you receive legal correspondence." After the call ended, I sat motionless trying to process this new threat. Howard moved to the sofa beside me, his presence steady as always. "We knew this was a possibility when we published," he reminded me gently. "That's why we had the publisher's legal team review everything so carefully. The truth is our strongest defense." Despite his reassurance, anxiety crept back into corners of my mind I thought I'd cleared. That night, for the first time in months, I dreamed of Vanessa, her perfect smile, her calculating eyes, the casual cruelty in her laugh when she thought I couldn't hear. I woke at 3 a.m., heart racing, momentarily disoriented between past and present. Morning brought clarity and resolve. I wouldn't allow the threat of Vanessa's retaliation to undermine everything I'd built. After coffee and careful consideration, I called Ms. Rodriguez, who had remained a valued advisor since the guardianship battle. "A defamation suit is primarily an intimidation tactic in this situation," she explained after I detailed Alicia's warning. "She's hoping you'll panic and offer a settlement or issue some kind of retraction that would undermine your credibility and potentially impact the criminal case against her. So what do we do?" "Nothing for now. Don't acknowledge any awareness of her plans. Continue your work as usual. If and when legal papers arrive, we'll respond appropriately. But in my professional opinion, she's bluffing. A lawsuit would open her to discovery processes that would only strengthen the criminal case building against her." Armed with this perspective, I refocused on our ongoing projects. The following week brought an invitation that significantly brightened my outlook, a request to speak at a national conference on elder justice in Washington, D.C. The 3-day event would bring together policymakers, law enforcement, social service providers, and advocates from across the country to address the growing crisis of elder abuse in all its forms. "They want both of us to present on our educational model," I told Howard excitedly. "And they're covering all expenses. It's an opportunity to influence national approaches to prevention." The preparation for this prestigious engagement consumed our attention, effectively displacing worries about Vanessa's threatened lawsuit. We refined our presentation, updated our materials, and coordinated with other speakers to ensure our content complemented rather than duplicated their contributions. The intellectual challenge invigorated me, proving yet again that mental engagement doesn't diminish with age if properly nurtured. 2 weeks before the conference, an unexpected development shifted my emotional landscape. Daniel called not his usual pattern of notes with checks, but an actual phone conversation. His voice sounded different, somehow steadier, more mature than I remembered. "Mom, I heard about Vanessa's threats regarding the book." The information surprised me. I hadn't realized they maintained any contact after their divorce. "I wanted you to know that if it comes to legal action, I'm prepared to testify about what actually happened. I have documentation of my own that would support your account." The offer stunned me into momentary silence. This wasn't the defensive son I'd confronted 2 years earlier, nor the hesitantly apologetic man who'd begun sending restitution payments. This was someone taking clear moral responsibility, placing himself potentially at legal risk to protect me. "How did you find out about this?" I finally managed to ask. "I've been working with a recovery counselor who specializes in making amends for financial harms. Part of my process has been monitoring Vanessa's activities to ensure she isn't continuing to harm others. One of my support group members works in legal services in Orlando and heard about her consulting with a lawyer about the book." This revelation that Daniel had been actively working to prevent further exploitation by Vanessa shifted something fundamental in my perception. His recovery wasn't just about personal redemption, but about practical protection of vulnerable others. It represented a level of moral growth I hadn't allowed myself to consider possible. "Thank you for telling me," I said, finding my voice again, "and for offering to testify if needed. That's significant. It's the bare minimum of what I owe you," he replied without self-pity. "Mom, I know we haven't really talked about everything. I've respected your need for space. But I'm planning to attend the Elder Justice Conference in D.C. Next month, my organization sent several of us for professional development. I'll understand if you prefer not to see me there, but I wanted you to know in advance rather than creating an awkward surprise." The prospect of seeing Daniel in person after more than 2 years stirred complicated emotions. Our limited communication had been carefully controlled, filtered through written updates and financial transactions. A face-to-face encounter would require navigating real-time reactions and unscripted interactions. I appreciate the consideration, I told him, buying time to process. Let me think about it and get back to you. That evening, Howard listened patiently as I worked through my conflicted feelings. What exactly are you afraid might happen if you see him at the conference? He asked, cutting through my circular reasoning with his characteristic directness. The question forced me to examine fears I'd been avoiding. That I'll fall back into old patterns of making everything okay for him. That I'll minimize what happened because it's easier than holding the tension. That seeing him will reopen wounds that have finally started to heal. Those are valid concerns, Howard acknowledged. But consider this, you're not the same woman who discovered their theft 2 years ago. You've rebuilt yourself, established clear boundaries, developed support systems. You're approaching this potential meeting from a position of strength, not vulnerability. His perspective helped crystallize my decision. I called Daniel the next morning. I think it would be appropriate for us to meet briefly during the conference, I told him. Not privately, but perhaps coffee in one of the public areas. I'll have Howard with me. Of course, Daniel agreed immediately. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'll work around your schedule entirely. The Washington trip arrived amid early autumn glory, crisp air, golden light leaves beginning to turn along the National Mall. Our hotel overlooked the Potomac, offering stunning views that reminded me how rarely I'd traveled during my teaching years. Financial constraints and family responsibilities had kept my world relatively small. Now, in what society often dismissed as the twilight years, my horizons were expanding in unexpected directions. Our presentation on the second day received enthusiastic response. Policymakers requested copies of our curriculum for review. Representatives from senior organizations in other states asked about adaptation rights. A Senate committee staffer invited us to submit written testimony for an upcoming hearing on elder justice legislation. The recognition validated our approach and opened possibilities for broader impact. Throughout these professional triumphs, I remained aware of Daniel's presence at the conference. I spotted him in workshop audiences, noted his thoughtful questions to presenters, observed his networking with other attendees. He appeared thinner than I remembered, but healthier somehow, clear-eyed, engaged, present in a way he hadn't been during the years of his addiction. Our arranged meeting took place on the final morning. Howard and I arrived at the designated cafe corner 15 minutes early, claiming a small table with good sightlines to the entrance. I'd chosen my outfit carefully professional, but approachable, neither overly formal nor falsely casual. These small decisions helped maintain my sense of agency in a situation charged with emotional risk. Daniel arrived precisely on time, alone as agreed. The moment of recognition carried a peculiar duality. He was simultaneously the son I'd raised, and a stranger shaped by experiences we hadn't shared. He hesitated briefly before approaching, respecting the invisible boundary around our table, until I nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." He began, settling into the chair across from us. "Your presentation yesterday was remarkable. The curriculum you've developed is already changing how our organization approaches client education." The professional compliment provided safe conversational ground, allowing us to establish rhythm and rapport before venturing into more personal territory. We discussed the conference highlights, the evolving field of elder protection, the challenges of effective prevention. Howard contributed thoughtfully, his presence anchoring me when emotion threatened to overshadow reason. Eventually, the conversation reached a natural pause. Daniel's expression shifted subtly as he gathered himself for what came next. "Mom, I've written so many versions of this in my head over the past 2 years, but being here now, I find myself struggling for the right words." His voice remained steady despite the evident emotion behind it. "The simple truth is that I failed you completely as a son, as someone you trusted as a decent human being. The gambling addiction explains some of it, but excuses none of it. I violated everything you taught me about integrity and responsibility." The unvarnished acknowledgement, free from qualifications or implicit requests for absolution, held more weight than any elaborate apology could have. This wasn't performance contrition, but a clear-eyed recognition of harm done. "What I hope you know," he continued after a moment, "is that while I can never undo that betrayal, it became the foundation for rebuilding myself into someone who would never make those choices again. The work I'm doing now with financial literacy for at-risk youth, my volunteer time with gambling addiction recovery groups, It all stems from trying to create something constructive from the wreckage of my worst decisions. As he spoke, I studied him carefully, searching for signs of the manipulation that had characterized our interactions during the exploitation period. I found none of the subtle tells I'd learned to recognize, no deflection of responsibility, no minimizing of impact, no implicit pressure for forgiveness or reconciliation. He was simply offering his truth, leaving me complete freedom to respond as I needed. I appreciate your candor, I finally said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. And I recognize the significant changes you've made. The consistent restitution payments, your professional redirection, your willingness to testify against Vanessa if necessary, these actions speak more convincingly than any words could. Relief flickered across his features, quickly replaced by attentive focus as I continued. I want you to understand something important. I don't regret exposing what happened. I don't regret the boundaries I established. Those actions weren't just about protecting myself financially, they were about reclaiming my dignity and autonomy. In that process, I discovered strengths and possibilities I might never have known otherwise. Daniel nodded, absorbing this without defensiveness. The work you're doing is changing lives, he said simply, including mine, though from a distance. Watching you transform your experience into something that helps others has been instructive. The conversation continued for another half hour, neither strained nor entirely comfortable, but substantive in ways our previous communications hadn't been. We didn't discuss future plans or potential reconciliation. Some bridges need to be rebuilt slowly, one careful stone at a time, testing each placement before adding the next. As we prepared to part, Daniel handed me an envelope. "This isn't a request for anything," he clarified quickly. "It's documentation I mentioned regarding Vanessa. Bank records, text messages, emails from the period when we were taking your money. If her lawsuit threat materializes, this provides additional evidence beyond what you already have." The gesture represented something beyond mere practical assistance. It was a tangible demonstration of having chosen sides, my protection over loyalty to his former partner in crime. After he left, Howard examined the documents briefly and confirmed their potential value. This would significantly strengthen any defense against defamation claims, he noted. More importantly, it represents a meaningful act of restitution beyond financial repayment. The Washington Conference marked a turning point not just in our educational work, which expanded significantly following the national exposure, but in my internal landscape as well. The brief meeting with Daniel hadn't erased the past, but it had created space for a different possible future. Not the unquestioning restoration of former relationships, but perhaps the careful construction of something new built on clearer terms and mutual respect. The following months brought continued professional development. Our consulting work with the state attorney's office expanded to include training for financial institutions on recognizing exploitation warning signs. The Elder Justice Committee invited us to help draft proposed legislative changes, strengthening protections for vulnerable adults. Our book entered its third printing with updated resources and expanded sections on emotional recovery. Throughout this period of external achievement, I continued my personal evolution as well. The support group remained a cornerstone of my weekly routine, though my role had shifted from seeking help to providing it. Howard and I deepened our relationship, finding comfortable rhythms that balanced togetherness with independence. And my cautious communication with Daniel continued primarily through emails and occasional phone conversations focused on substantive topics rather than emotional processing. As my 76th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary trajectory of the past 2 years. From the devastating discovery of betrayal to national recognition as an elder justice advocate. From financial vulnerability to renewed security. From isolation to meaningful connection. The transformation wasn't just about recovering what had been lost, but discovering aspects of myself that might have remained dormant without the catalyst of crisis. "I've been thinking about something," I told Howard during our regular Sunday brunch. "Remember when we first started working together and you said sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you truly need?" He nodded, waiting for me to continue. "I've realized that what I lost wasn't everything. It was what I thought was everything. The money, yes. The relationship with my son as it had been. The assumptions about my remaining years. But what emerged in their place has been more authentic somehow. More aligned with who I actually am rather than who I was expected to be." Howard reached across the table to take my hand, his eyes reflecting understanding that required no verbal response. "There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi," I continued. When pottery breaks, they repair it with gold, making the repaired piece more beautiful and valuable than the original. The damage becomes part of its history and character, rather than something to disguise. I paused, finding the right words for what I needed to express. I think that's what these years have been a kintsugi process for my life. The breaks are still visible. They'll always be part of my story, but they've been filled with something precious that makes the whole stronger and more meaningful than before. He smiled, squeezing my hand gently. That's a beautiful metaphor, and remarkably accurate. As we finished our meal, plans taking shape for the week ahead, workshops to conduct, meetings to attend, a new garden project to begin, I felt a profound sense of alignment. Not the false peace of denial or the brittle calm of suppressed emotion, but the genuine serenity that comes from living truthfully, purposefully, with full acceptance of both pain and possibility. The betrayal that had once threatened to define my remaining years had instead become merely a chapter in a continuing story, significant but not conclusive. Ahead lay pages yet to be written, experiences yet to be integrated, growth yet to be achieved. At 76, I stood not at the epilogue of my life, but at the beginning of an unexpected and welcome new section, ready to discover what would unfold next. This was the greatest revelation of my journey. That age is not an ending, but a vantage point offering perspective that can infuse each remaining day with deeper meaning and clearer purpose. The woman who had once feared being dismissed as elderly and irrelevant now moved through the world with quiet confidence. Her voice heard her wisdom, valued her presence, making a tangible difference in lives beyond her own. They had thought age made me weak, but time had revealed what they could never understand, that wisdom earned through years and hardened through adversity creates a strength that youth, with all its energy and ambition, can neither comprehend nor overcome. And that perhaps was the most satisfying victory of all.